In this video, we're going to take a look at exploits. We're going to compile some exploits that are written in C. We're going to make them available both in Linux and Windows, so they're both going to be reverse shells that are going to enable us to get a reverse session on our Kali machine. So anytime we're talking about exploits, just think about this as identifying vulnerabilities. So we're kind of looking for exploits, and we have to look at how we can compile exploits because sometimes they are incompatible with different operating systems. So let's jump in and take a look at compiling. We'll take a look at exploits, and we'll look at sort of the process that we kind of go through to identify potential vulnerabilities and to exploit those vulns within a certain system. So I'm here on my Kali Linux machine, and I've already gone away and I have done two port scans. I've done a nmap tac a command port scan, and then I've done a script command as well, just so we can sort of see the difference. And specifically, I'm looking for SMB. So again, this is not going to be more of a how am I going to scan, what command syntaxes am I going to use, but this is just more around exploit, not exploit development, but kind of identifying how we go through that process of exploiting a certain vulnerability, in this case, SMB, because SMB is a common type of vulnerability in most environments, and a lot of the environments run on an outdated system, and sometimes they're susceptible to eternal blue and these reverse shell code execution sessions. So on the left here, I'm going to just do an output of our nmap tac or command. So I just did an nmap dash a with a port 445, and then on the right side, I've used the nmap tac scripts command. So let me just go back a directory. And then I use obviously the tac O capital A to output these files into the associated, basically outputting the file, or basically outputting the findings into a file, which makes us able to render like this. So let me just more nmap, which one was this? This was our script, command.nmap. And we kind of sort of see a little bit of the differences already between the two. Now, if I just scroll up a little bit, this one, let me just scroll up a little bit on here as well. We can sort of see the left one here kind of goes into the detail. So you kind of see the command that I've ran, which was nmap tac a port 445, and then the output file into the nmap directory, and I just called it nmap or command, right? And then obviously that IP address that was our target. And it kind of goes through and identifies the systems. It tells us it's a Windows 2008 R2 box, and it's got some information here, right? So it kind of goes through telling us that it's running, different SMB versions, and their BIOS name and stuff like that, and kind of gives us that information. And you can kind of see on the right side here where really instantly it tells us that it's vulnerable, and it's vulnerable to a remote code execution vulnerability that's known in Windows SMB version 1 servers known as MS17010. So it tells us it's available for an exploit, so it's vulnerable to that exploit. Here's the CVE if we want to go away and obviously read it and consume it. Risk factor is high, so it's a critical RCE that's known across the Windows environment. So at this stage, we've kind of gone through the OS discovery, it's gone through that security mode, it's tell us, it's not much information, right? So we wanted to define this with a script that kind of spits it out in more details, and it's sort of understanding the compatibility between the two different commands. So again, you have to be familiar with port scanning. I'm not going to go through it in too much detail in this video, but being understandable across different commands and switches that are available when using nmap. And sometimes you may have to use a couple of different switches to kind of give you a more quicker understanding of what potential risks are associated with those different systems, like we've just done. So as we can see, that SV tac E, which is the command that I've run up here for this nmap, the same host essentially, and I've just run a different script. So I've run the SV, so give me the versions, identify the operating system discovery, and then go through and actually give me that SMB vuln with a dash wildcard, so any of those scripts. And we can look at those scripts too in more detail. So let's go look into those scripts. And those scripts live in a location. Here they are. So I've already kind of was playing through this already before. You can go through user share nmap scripts, and then we can basically group for SMB specifically, and then it pulls out all the SMB associated scripts that we could run against this host. So the one that I did was anything above the SMB tac vuln dash. So basically took all these scripts and basically ran known vulnerabilities associated with them, took all those scripts and then pointed it at the host. And then it basically came back and said, hey, MS17010 is a script that's vulnerable to this host. So that's how we can go away and actually look at this. We can see that it's susceptible to that MS17010 vulnerability, and that's associated with SMB version 1 as a service that's running, and that's good for us. Right now we can go away and actually research this vulnerability, and hopefully we can exploit in a few ways. So I'm going to open up a browser, and there's a couple of ways that we can do this, and I've already gone into exploitdb.com, and then I've just popped in the actual MS17010 vulnerability that sort of told us that the RC was the remote code execution was available with this MS17010. And now we can go through and basically research and understand which one is going to be the best fit for us to potentially exploit this host. So let's go through each of these and sort of understand, like, there's a date parameter here that tells us the date, tells us a download option. Basically, is it a vulnerable application or so? So we kind of understand, well, what type of payload, what kind of execution. We can see, like, the title, has it been verified, the type of payload itself. So is this a remote payload? Is it going to cause a denial of service issue? What platform is it available through? And then obviously the author behind that, the exploit. So that's how we can sort of start to use that. We can also use search exploit within Linux as well. So I can go into search exploit and then search MS17010, and it gives me kind of a similar output as well, which kind of takes the database out of exploit.db and then it puts it into search exploit. So it allows us to consume and define the details within search exploit as well. So I'm just going to minimize this, and let's just go through a few of these and we start to sort of understand what they each do and how they sort of run. So let's just open up a couple. Okay, so we've got one here. So Microsoft 7, 8.1, 2008 R2, 2012 R2, 2016 R2, Eternal Blue. So just know that sometimes there's code names that are given to vulnerabilities as well. So not only do we look at the MS17010, maybe we can start looking at code names like Eternal Blue and things like that. So you can see here that there's a couple of other ones: Eternal Synergy, Eternal Champion, Eternal Blue, and we can go away and we can start researching them as well for potential exploits. So that's one sort of way. And then the kind of methodology is you can start to see, like, this one here, for example, is a Python script. So you've got the shebang, user bin Python, and then it goes through about what this payload is actually, or what this exploit is actually doing. It tells you the systems that it's tested on, tells you some notes from the author and stuff like that. So this one kind of tells me already that it requires some sort of variable. So it's got a username and password, which we don't have in this case, right? So we can start defining, is it safe to run on the on obviously the host? Is it going to damage the host? We can start to see if this is available for certain OSs, like for example Windows 2000 and above, like as you can see here. So we can start understanding a little bit about what this script does and the meaning around. Um, we don't have the information of this username and password yet, but however, we start understanding what this script is requesting or requiring for it to run successfully. So that's how you sort of go through it, understand it. There may be things here that are kind of over your head, but that's okay, right? That's part of the process around understanding this at that sort of entry level process. So let's move on to this one. So again, the same sort of approach, right? So you got different systems that it's been tested on. It's got some reference details here, some more information. It's got some buffer information as well. Kind of understanding, right? You go through it and you can sort of pick one and what's the best one that's available to our system that we're going to exploit. And most of the time, it's that trial and error. It's reading it, understanding it, and then potentially launching it at that host, but with the understanding that it's going to obviously give us some information that we can go off. So at this point, we've gone through the information. So this is sort of the process that you would go through once you sort of identify that vulnerability. You'll go through and basically look at the exploits that are potentially available for it. You'll download them, and then we'll start running these against the hosts. Now, the other thing here is just to be mindful of is that um, sometimes we're going to have to compile exploits because those exploits are not compatible. So let's just take a look at this. So I've found this reverse shell exploit by an author called Eisenin, if I'm saying that correct. And I've gone away and I've just downloaded this. So I've just done a git clone. I've cloned the repository obviously install the compiler, which we're going to talk about doing the Windows compiler, and we'll do one for Linux as well. And I've just gone away and I've just downloaded this repository, and you can see that there's a couple of there's been a Linux reverse shell that's been created and a Windows one, and we'll take a look we'll take a look into these because it's quite important that sometimes we're going to have to go away and actually compile these for the systems that we're going to be testing it against. So in this case, you can see that these scripts have been written in C. So there's obviously going to be incompatibility between the systems that we're going to be testing it on. So let's go out of this and let's just jump into our reverse shell and let's walk through it. So here's our reverse shell. So there's a change client um, script that's been created. So basically you can run this script and then it'll allow you to put in the IP address and the port across both your Linux script and your Windows script, which is really handy. Or you can do it manually. You can open up the linux.c or the windows.c and actually configure the IP address manually. And we can do either, right? So right now I'll just go into the actual file itself. So I'll go into Linux and we can go in and actually configure, and I've already done it. So just to make things easier, so I've put in the IP address of our Kali box. So in this case, it's 192.168.1.139, and the port that I'm obviously going to be listening on. So basically do that. You can go through the actual script as well. So it kind of has how it's going to go away and do all these sort of, do the reverse shell. And then from there, I can do the same thing with our Windows .c as well. So basically the .c is basically meaning that these both files have that .c file extension, basically the C scripts. And anytime we try to run these, the operating system itself cannot always run that code because obviously the scripts, it doesn't know how to interpret the data and the information in this code base. So kind of think of this as similar to us trying to run a maybe Python inside Linux or with Windows, right? If we're trying to run a Python script and we don't have the dependencies, we don't have Python installed, it's not going to know how to do what we're telling it to do, right? So it's not installed, it's not going to know how to do it, and it doesn't know what to do. So it's just going to error out, it's going to throw out a hissy fit, and it's going to tell you something that we need to go and install it. It doesn't understand, or it doesn't recognize what you're trying to do. So it's similar, very similar to this as well, right? So for Python, if we're going to if we're going to run a Python script, well, we're going to have Python install the packages, install the host, and understands how to use that information. And C is a little bit different, but it's kind of the same as well. We need to use a compiler to then obviously go away and work with these scripts. We have to compile them to make them known to those specific operating systems. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to go in and we're going to configure these. We've already configured the IP address. We've configured the port details here. Because then the host then, so obviously we can't run this on the host because then the host doesn't know how to interpret that language or interpret that data, I should say. So we're going to have to go away and basically compile it first for it to be understood and interpreted in that proper language, right? So let's go away and let's do a couple of things. Let's compile it for Linux, and we'll also compile it for Windows, and then we'll jump over to our Windows machine here. We'll pull it down, we'll run the payload, and hopefully it should work, right? So let's do that first. Let's just maybe do, I'm just trying to think the best way to maybe do this. Let me use the change client quickly, and I'll make sure that we've got the right details. And we've got the 139 address, which is fine. So let's just do 1.139, and I'll do .444. Okay, and then it's gone away and actually it's put in the details of my IP address and the port into both of these Windows and Linux.c files. So, okay, that's the first thing. So let's go away now and then let's compile both of these payloads. Now, one of the best ways, firstly, if we're talking about Linux, I'm going to move in this Linux.c file and I'm going to compile it inside our Vagrant Ubuntu machine. Just so sometimes there's maybe incompatibilities that happen. Again, there's some things that always go wrong when you're trying to move files around. So just understand that there's things that are going to go wrong. Could be that you have to maybe move that machine while it compiles and decompiles it. Maybe it has to use similar versions that are associated with this host that it's running on, and vice versa. So I'm just going to move it over to this host first, this linux.c file. We're going to put it into our pawn drop. We'll use wget, pull it down, and then we'll compile it, and then we'll run it and see if we actually get a reverse shell, and then we'll do the same thing for Windows as well. So I've got pawn drop up and running here. So let's upload the linux.c file. Okay, copy the location. Let's paste this. Okay, so there's our file. So let's begin that. Let's compile it, right? So we've got to go compile the C script for Linux as it runs on this specific host, right? So we've got to use GCC. So let me write it out first, and then I'll talk about um, how to on what these actually mean. So let me give it a name. So Linux reverse shell 4444, and the file itself would be our Linux.c. So GCC is basically a GNU compiler collection. So it's a bunch of compilers that come together. So you can just use GCC as it's a known Linux compiler. And the TAC-O just basically says the output name. So what we want the output file, and then obviously provide the actual file that we're compiling. So that TAC-O is basically saying our output file, so the file that we're going to use now on this host, and then the original file, which is this linux.c. And then as I hit enter, we should get this shell 444, and it is in an executable state as well. So if I can just run that now, we should be able to get a reverse shell back into our Kali box. So let me just fire up our netcat network listener with verbose on the port 444. I hit enter there, and then we should run this, and we should get our shell, and which we did. So I can just go, who am I? Roots, uname, tac A, and it tells me the information of this host. So at this stage, we're kind of already in, we've got access to this machine now. So we can go into and start looking at the cat, Etsy, oops, not a nice shell, Etsy shadow, did it break? Let's try it again. There we go. Okay. So you can start to sort of see that that's already worked. It's got a not so good shell. That's okay. It makes us work with it, right? So at this stage, we know it kind of works. Tells us what present working directory that we're in, and we can start maybe creating. Go back on this host. There's our file test account that we've created. So at this stage, we've got that reverse shell, which is good. So we know that works. So let's do the same thing for Windows. So let's compile the Windows one. Now the Windows one is a little bit longer. So what I have done is I've already gone into the compiler, and I've kind of already poured it out so we don't have to remember this laundry list of a command, right? So let me just copy this, paste selection, and we're going to use this Windows-C, and the output file is Windows reverse shell.exe, and then we'll use this -ls2 underscore 32, and hopefully now that should spit out our Windows reverse shell, and here it is. And let's go into our pawn drop. Let's upload our Windows reverse shell, and it's in exe, which is good. And then we can go into our Windows box and pull this down. So let's just run PowerShell, and let's use wget http colon whack whack 192.168.1.139. Paste that there. Does that actually come down? Doesn't look like that. Just go into For some odd reason, it doesn't look like it's the file down. That's okay. Let's just jump into our web browser and see if this works. Let's just try re-uploading it and see if that works. Hopefully the actual session is still running. Maybe it hasn't been closed. Which is weird because we kind of used it here already, so let's just maybe go away and restart the session. Let's port it down. Why hasn't this worked? And I think I know why. I think I've been so familiar with using wget that I should have used curl. Let's just try this. Five. That's okay. All right. So that's worked. So it was just a matter of using a different function. That's okay. So either way, now we've put it down through PowerShell, we've put it down through our web browser. And these are the things, right? Sometimes things just your brain just kind of defaults to something else and you just end up spending time troubleshooting and trying to find out why. So that's okay. So there's our reverse shell now, which is this.exe, and we can actually go away and run it. So where's our directory? So we're in this administrators vagrant. So let's maybe just go there. So see, this is back. This administrator may block us, but that's okay. So we're all good. Administrator vagrant. Okay, so let's go back. Let's launch our Netcat listener, and then let's see if we've got our shell. So Netcat listen on 444. Let's run this shell. So it should be running, and there we are. So that's worked. Okay, so we can do a pwd. So who am I? There we go. Cool. So that we can sort of define now that we've compiled. So we compiled our C script for Linux, we transferred it over pawn drop with wget. We did the same thing with our Windows compiler as well, and we had to use the curl function inside PowerShell, pull it down, and just on that. So the way we had to do that was just go to the curl function. We have to specify what we're pulling it down from. So there's a location, and then we just had to specify an output location on what we're going to rename that file locally once we pull it down. So that's how we can sort of go away. We can use both Linux compilers, but our Windows compiler, and then we can basically now begin our post-exploitation activities, right? So now that connection has been established via both Kali and both Windows, we know that both those compilers have worked successfully. So that's kind of it when we talk about exploits and compiling exploits. As you've seen with our SMB, we did our vulnerability scans, we identified what potential exploits there are, and that's how we look for exploits, and we define vulnerabilities and then obviously compile them within different operating systems like we did with Windows and Linux. So I hope you've enjoyed this video with a little bit of hiccup with our curl and wget downloads. I hope you've enjoyed this segment. For any other questions that you have, I'd love to hear about them. And as always, just want to say thank you for viewing and see you all in an upcoming video. Bye for now.